Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we don't have a ton to talk about. The biggest news, obviously, the MW3 beta that was on PlayStation 5 only this past weekend and is now expanding to Xbox and PC this coming weekend. Probably by the time that you're listening to this, it will be available on Xbox and PC in addition to PS5. So we'll be giving our first thoughts, considering we are part of the PS5 clan, the console master race, I guess you could say. But we also have some CDL stuff, including the Carolina Royal Ravens new GM and coach, and some unfortunate reporting about players and coaches and staff not being paid what they are obviously owed by one of the CDL team's organizations. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Been a while, like we were saying, but good to be back and ready to get this show on the road.
So let's get the CDL stuff out of the way, just because that's kind of the lesser detailed, and I'm sure we don't have a ton of thoughts on this, but we've been gone for nearly a month, and pretty much nothing has happened in or around the CDL in that time. We were talking right before we went live with the stream that there was an Optic throwback tournament that Hitch, one of the content creators at Optic, he hosted. There was some drama between like Nadeshot and Crimsix about whatever Crimsix said on a podcast, but really there hasn't been much other than that, except the Carolina Royal Ravens naming Brian Saintt their GM and head coach heading into the next season. Of course, Saintt most notably was the GM and head coach of the Minnesota Rocker from the time they entered the CDL until this offseason when they parted ways, the Rocker and he did. And now he has found a new team in the Royal Ravens, formerly the London Royal Ravens, now relocated to Charlotte and are now representing Carolina as a whole. Your thoughts on this? Because obviously Saintt, he did build the initial Minnesota Rocker roster. We've talked about it a lot before about how the first half of the first season for Minnesota was very good when they were on land before COVID shut everything down, and then they were just never able to get back up to that level for that season. But they have been somewhat competitive at various points since then. So, what are your thoughts on Brian Saintt joining the Carolina Royal Ravens as their GM and head coach?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a move that, makes sense based on um what we know in the current landscape of things. Like, it's reported that Rambo is uh joining Seattle and has reportedly formed his roster there, but nothing official on that front yet.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, all things considered, there, like, Rambo would be one of the top free agent coaches slash general managers in my opinion. But Saints also got to be on that very short list. Can't really. I guess maybe Marky B, depending on that situation with LAG, if he's still there or not. Um, Nobody else is really jumping out to me right away. For like just a short list of coaches if you're trying to get someone. So makes sense to me from that perspective. Will be interesting to see what kind of roster he's able to build as we've. I mean, it's been a while, but still 4 teams officially without rosters at this point. One of those teams, Seattle, reportedly has a roster. So whichever way you want to look at it, there's a minimum of 12 starting roster spots that need to be filled by Vegas, Carolina, and Los Angeles Gorillas. So, um, getting towards the end of the offseason, obviously, as we're approaching the official release of the game before the next season, will be interesting to see what kind of roster Saintt is able to put together for this new team. I guess not technically a new organization or anything, but it is in a new location, similar to what Paris did with Vegas last year. The one thing that just jumps out to me is Saintt has been around in the scene for a very long time, back to some of the OG games in the past, and he's had some experience coaching a guy like Clayster in the past. He might have even played with someone like Attach. Maybe on one of those cursed teams. Obviously, he coached Attach on Minnesota too, but let me see. I think there might have just been one of those cursed teams back in the day when Attach was first coming up that Saintt played alongside Attach as well. So those are two names, two guys we haven't really heard much about in terms of potentially what they're doing. Clayster and Attach. Those are two veterans you could sort of have as a cornerstone to essentially build around, get some young guys around them, and potentially have a good squad to compete heading into next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if whenever Carolina announces their roster, one of it or both of those guys are on that team based on just previous relationships with Saintt, and not saying the friendship league or anything like that, because it totally makes sense. Former world champions, and in Clayster's case, multi-time world champion. So I just wouldn't be surprised if those guys are some of the names being thrown around for the potential roster, but we'll still have to wait and see what happens there, because we haven't, outside of the news of Saintt joining, we haven't heard any further news on potentially what Carolina's doing.
Yeah, with Saintt, it's like with any GM or any coach, it's very difficult to kind of determine how much credit they should get for certain roster moves or the success of a team. But I'm just going to assume that he deserves some kind of credit for the roster acquisitions that Minnesota made since he began working there. And that first roster on paper would not look like something incredible. If you look at, it had Assault, Silly, Godarex, they had Alex and Asim, and it's like that's a good roster, but on paper that doesn't seem like one of the best teams in the league. And before COVID hit, they were one of the best and most consistent teams in the league to that point. And I think he also was very good at identifying talent. Exceed was a substitute for that first year, and Exceed ended up being brought back into the CDL more recently. Obviously, Godarex was around before then, but I think he really proved how good he was in that first CDL season, despite how things ended up for the team as a whole. You had Standy coming in during that 2021 season, and Standy has been a part of the CDL since then, more notably probably with Toronto, or not more notably, but like more recently, and then with Vegas as well. He has kind of taken like these older veteran players like Attach and Priesta and Major Maniac, guys that have been around for several teams, and they contributed to some kind of success for that team. And obviously that win against Toronto is legendary and will always be one of the coolest moments in CDL history. So, we talked about it at length about how that roster entering the 2023 season looked to be one of the better ones, a really strong roster on paper that didn't end up panning out. How much blame he gets for that, or how much blame, say, someone like Looney gets blamed for that, like, I have no idea. That's kind of the catch-22 of a coach or a GM. Like, they might deserve a ton of credit and they might deserve a ton of blame for the team's successes or failures, but at the end of the day, like, we have no idea how much they're actually how much their impact is on the team versus a traditional sports teams coach where, Bill Belichick, who's arguably the greatest football coach ever, and his team is doing poorly now, and people are kind of turning on him, saying like maybe he's not good enough now, because people understand how important a good or great football head coach is. We just don't understand, or we haven't had the insight to know how much Saintt in particular is important to these rosters. But if he's able to do something like he was able to achieve with Minnesota, I think it should be a pretty good team. Like he doesn't need to sign big name, big money players to have success. We've seen that in the past before. And even if he did end up signing these big name players, someone like Attach, who's one of the more popular, more well-known players in the CDL, that wouldn't be a bad idea at all, because Attach is a very talented player. Everybody knows that. Before this past season, he was probably one of the most sought after free agents. At least, you would logically think that, considering he was an all-star despite not being on a great team. So I think it's cool that Saintt landed on his feet. I know he had talked after he parted ways with Minnesota about how it kind of sucked that he's had to move around so much over the past few years because of the CDL, like from Minnesota to Dallas. I think he was living somewhere else as well. And, that's just kind of like a really unfortunate reality for a lot of these COD players and COD coaches and staff members. So I'm glad that he was able to find a home with Carolina. Do you have anything else before I transition into this other topic, which is loosely related to Carolina?
I was just gonna say, you brought up two other names there too, in Godorex and Standy for previous teams that Saintt was involved in. Those are two other names who, I wouldn't be surprised if either of them got an opportunity with Carolina this year based on that past experience with Saintt. I would be really excited to see Godorex back in the league. I think, kind of like you said, and we've talked about it on the podcast before, he was essentially an MVP candidate before the CDL moved to online only due to COVID, and he hasn't really gotten a real shot back in the CDL since then. So I would like to see him back. And Standy was kind of like that mid-season move and during Cold War that kind of propelled Minnesota to that eventual Minnesota Miracle that you were alluding to as well. So, and another one is Fame from last year with Minnesota. It seemed like Saintt was pretty excited about having him join the roster. I believe he might have been in the announcement video for that and talked about it a little bit. I might be misremembering, but either way, there's definitely some interesting options, and that's just only based on previous experience. Obviously, there could be plenty of other players out there who don't have a pre-existing relationship with Saintt who might get an opportunity here as well. That's just speculation on our part and mostly on my part, as we don't really have any idea of what the team's going to look like.
Yeah, in particular with Godorex, because he was a part of the Challengers World Champions last year as well, and he's been touted as a really talented player before and since he's been in the CDL. I think it would just be natural for him to get another shot, whether that is Carolina with Saintt or that's another team. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's awesome. It's just awesome to see any player or anybody go into challengers and get rewarded for doing well in challengers versus just kind of getting forgotten there, which is kind of an unfortunate reality that a lot of these players and coaches have to face. Like I said, something loosely related to Carolina and more so their parent organization, Infinite Reality, which I believe bought Rect Global, which was the initial owner of the London Royal Ravens and also Rogue, the esports organization. The parent company of Infinite Reality, we wrote on this back in August, and I think the initial report is from Esports Maniacos. My Spanish is very limited, so but they're a Spanish outlet, and they reported in August that KOI, which is the LEC team, the Spanish LEC team, and their parent company Infinite Reality were, quote, reportedly dealing with critical financial troubles that have raised concerns about the team's future, end quote. And this has kind of bled into, as you could imagine, the CDL side of it. Of course, now the team is the Carolina Royal Ravens versus the London Royal Ravens, but still that is like irrelevant in the fact that if people aren't being paid, if they weren't being paid as a part of the London Royal Ravens, it doesn't really matter about that at all. And Dominate, who was the head coach of the London Royal Ravens, he replied to a Carolina Royal Ravens tweet and said, "Gaming for a company that pays their current and ex-employees what they're owed, winky face." So, I mean, that would seem to indicate that he's alleging that, he wasn't paid, or maybe other people weren't paid by the Royal Ravens or the parent company, however you want to distinguish that. What do you think about that? Because obviously it's by far not the first time that we've heard something like that in COD esports, or definitely esports. Denial is one of the most obvious examples, at least to me. Red Reserve is also one that pops out, but there are quite a few. So your thoughts on this possibly being another situation like that one?
That's just really my only thought is, I mean, oh boy, not again. Even just as recently as this past season with the whole Los Angeles Guerrillas situation, there's enough uncertainty around the future of the CDL without further organizations throwing potential financial troubles into the mix there to muddy the waters and have people questioning it even more. So, probably something here that we won't hear about unless Dominate or the other the organization makes a statement for whatever reason. But it's something obviously that you don't exactly want to hear about it, because it doesn't look good for anybody, and it's in an industry that is trying to become more professional, stuff like this, and there's obviously scandals everywhere and all sorts of facets of life, but anything like this can, like I said earlier, kind of muddy the waters and make things a little more difficult to traverse for anybody involved. So probably I would be surprised if we heard anything, unless like I said, maybe Nominate like tweets out something if and when he eventually gets paid, which obviously I hope that happens for his sake. But yeah, I'd be surprised if we heard anything else like that. I mean, at this point I just would like to be at a point where all these teams are, financially stable, and that's kind of what was the hope with the franchise model, right? Is like kind of hope we didn't have to worry about things with like Denial and Red Reserve, like you mentioned, but that certainly hasn't been the case all around. Obviously, there are some examples of organizations where you haven't really heard anything like that, but I mean, even an organization like 100 Thieves, with them openly saying they're going to cut back on spending for this upcoming season. It's just esports as a business is in a rough spot right now. So it's definitely, like you said, it's not the first time we're hearing about this, and it potentially might not be the last. Obviously, it would be nice if it was, but I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly what you said about how the franchising system was supposed to eliminate this sort of incompetence in terms of business, because when you have kind of an unregulated, like self-supporting system, like say what we had with the CWL before the CDL, or something like what soccer is in anywhere else but the United States, because the United States is very well known for all of its sports leagues having a franchise system, no relegation, no promotion. Everybody kind of just buys in and they have a spot no matter what. And that decreases competitiveness at the lower levels, let's say, because if you're an NFL team, say you're the Carolina Panthers, who are horrible, then they are incentivized to lose as much as possible to get the best possible draft pick they can for themselves. Or I think in this case it goes to Chicago anyway, but in theory they would lose to get a better draft pick for themselves. Whereas if you are, say, like Real Madrid, and you found yourself in the middle of your league table, which would be horrific for them because they're one of the best teams in the world all the time. But if they ever found themselves as kind of like a mediocre team, they don't have any incentive to lose as much as possible, because then they get relegated to a subpar league that pays less money. But that also works on the opposite end, where you have these teams that overperform for a season. They get promoted to a league that they can't financially support. Like, they can't pay their players nearly as much as the other teams can, or if they try to, that can lead to financial ruin for these teams. And we've seen that in many cases where clubs try to pay and be competitive financially, and that ends up kind of bankrupting and just kind of ruining whatever financial state they're in. And the franchise system is supposed to delete that. It's supposed to allow teams to kind of pay for what they can pay, and everybody's supposed to share in the wealth, revenue splits and all of that. Of course, there's not a lot of revenue in esports, as we've seen. That's why a lot of these organizations have said goodbye to whatever competitive gaming teams or players or streamers that they plan to get in before the pandemic. But this is supposed, the CDL is supposed to be the best of the best, the most stable of these teams and of these organizations. And, I'm not going to say that the Carolina Royal Ravens or Infinite Reality or Rect Globe or whatever, I'm not saying that they are guilty. But if they are guilty, that's so egregious that you can't even pay your players. I wonder if the CEO is getting paid what he's supposed to be getting paid on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. Like, I just think it's, that's, you need to support the people that you are obligated to support. If you own a business, your primary concern should be to be honest and to be helpful to your employees, because they are relying on you. So hopefully everything gets situated with the Royal Ravens and Infinite Reality. Hope everybody gets paid, because that would, nobody wants to go through that. That's not fair to anyone. And I just hope the best for them. But yeah, it just needs to be out of esports entirely. If you can't support what your goals are, then don't try to support that, and don't try to be something that you're not. It's better to be honest and not pay people than to be dishonest and not pay people, even though neither is a very good look regardless. I think that's about it for what we had, at least in CDL related manners, unless you had anything, because really the biggest thing that we wanted to talk about was the beta, because like I said at the top of the show, the MW3 beta started this past weekend on PS5. There was an early access period before like the weekend officially started, and then there was I think 3 days of an actual beta or whatever they call that. But until, what was that, Tuesday, it closed down, and then today, we're recording this on Wednesday, there has been no MW3 beta, and then tomorrow, Thursday, I think starts it up, or are they? Yeah, so tomorrow, Thursday, they start back up, and it'll be on PS5, PC, and Xbox. Let's get your first impressions or thoughts. I guess, how much did you play of the beta? I know you're very busy just personally, but how much of the beta did you get to play, and what were your kind of first thoughts as a game?
I probably got in 5 or 6 hours, somewhere around there. I hit max level, which is only level 20. I maxed out the ACR or the MCW, and I got close to maxing out the striker or the ump. But other than that, I played a lot Friday night, and I didn't play too much after that. I played a couple games once Rust was added on the 8th, I think. But I only played like 2 games of Rust even, so I didn't play too much, but I played enough to get a decent vibe for it. And before this, I hadn't touched Call of Duty in a long time. I had a couple Warzone sessions with my cousin. I reluctantly played over the last couple months, but I haven't really played much Modern Warfare 2 or Call of Duty since probably February. So it did feel a little good to get back on the game. Um, I have I've definitely said it more in our Twitter group chat or in Slack for work stuff, but I feel like I mentioned it on the podcast, but just in general, I feel like this is the least excited I've ever been for Call of Duty. Um, Even when we previously had announcements of like the OG MW2 maps coming for MW3, I was like, I didn't let myself get too excited just because I've been I feel like the last couple of years have really ruined my uh, passion for the game and just on strictly playing it perspective, I haven't enjoyed it as much. So I had very low expectations going into the beta, I guess, and not even necessarily the beta, but just the launch of the MW3 in general. And yeah, I think I did enjoy what I did play. I thought surprisingly, I thought of the remastered maps, which to start the beta was just Favela, Estate, and Skid Row. Skid Row was one of my favorite maps from the OG MW2. I love playing Search on that map. But I actually thought Estate was like the most visually pleasing upgrade that the three maps got. I thought the other, Favela and Skid Row did look better, obviously, than their maps that came out 14 years ago. But there's something just about the first time that I loaded into a state and I actually saw like the scenery and stuff like that. It really just looked so much better to me, and that could just be as simple as the technology advancing so much since MW2 came out in '09. But um, of those three maps, that Estate, which you could make the case Estate might even be the worst map to play on out of those three. But just strictly visually speaking, I was pretty impressed with the improvements that were made to Estate. Um, and yeah, I enjoyed using the ACR MCW. Once I got that leveled up and got some attachments on it. I mean, even with the default class, it felt really good. But once I got my own class and was messing around with the attachments a little bit, um, I definitely enjoyed using that, and right now I wouldn't be surprised if that was like the go-to gun for competitive. Obviously, we've seen in the past where there have been really strong guns in the beta that get nerfed before the official launch, so it's a little too early to tell for sure if we will be seeing the ACR as like the go-to AR for competitive in 2024, but just based on the previous history of the Modern Warfare series and stuff like that, I wouldn't be surprised if even if they did nerf the gun a little bit, it was still the best AR. Again, small sample size, more ARs and more guns to come, but definitely was my favorite gun to use. And I use the Striker. Like I said, I don't think I finished maxing it out, but I did use it enough to get close to maxing it out. And I enjoyed using that. It didn't feel like my from MW2 or MW3, the OG games, but it felt good, and especially in some of those like close range battles on Favela, in those tight like corner alleyway sort of things. That was a little more preferable than the ACR there, but overall I did enjoy using both of those guns, and yeah, I think my sister's getting married this weekend, so I'm not going to get to play as much I Rise as I would have liked to maybe play a little tomorrow night or Friday night potentially, but that's another one of my favorite maps from the OG MW2. So definitely excited to see what they do with that map and how they are able to enhance it or anything like that. But um, yeah, I gotta say, probably might be some nostalgia talking, but it definitely, for the very low expectations I had for this game, I was pleasantly surprised. And obviously, there's definitely some things that need to be improved, and that's the point of the beta. But I was definitely, you know, a little surprised with my low expectations from just the initial uh, beta testing I got in over the last weekend.
Yeah, I think I share pretty much, pretty similar, um, feelings about this. I think before the beta began, I said in Slack something along the lines like I've never been more like pessimistic and jaded about a COD launch before, and I still think that's true. So I don't think the beta has completely washed that away. Maybe if we get through this week of the beta, then maybe that'll change. I have no idea, but I'm still negative about it. Even as someone who didn't play like a ton of like MW2 back in whatever that was, like 2009, 2010. Like I would have been 11 or 12 at the time, and BO2 was like the first game that I played like actual consistently. There was a lot of campaign, so I do remember Estate as like I think it was a campaign mission map as well. Or I just recognize it for whatever reason. And then I do remember Favela, and obviously Rust got added over the weekend, and Rust has been in at least one or two games since then, and it's a very like famous map in Call of Duty history. And I definitely played High Rise at some point in my life. So like even as someone who didn't play those maps, like I thought there was some of them were fine. Skid Row was I was pleasantly surprised. Favela and Estate were absolute butt cheeks, like the worst maps this week. Like once Rust got added in, I tried to avoid Favela and Estate as much as possible because I just didn't have fun playing on those maps at all. Favela I thought was probably the worst one out of the bunch. There's just too many places to look on that map that any time you pass a corner, you're probably getting shot in the back. So it just wasn't a lot of fun. And granted, I'm really bad at COD. I've always been pretty bad, but I've been away for several years, and that's not made it any better. So, maybe take it as kind of like a noob point of view. But I hated Favela. I thought Estate was pretty bad, but better than Favela. Skid Row was good. I don't know what kind of comp modes could be on Skid Row, if any. Rust obviously would never be a comp map. It's just too small for any of those modes. And then High Rise is kind of to be determined. I don't know. I think S&D might have been on that map at some point, or the old heads like Aches and JCap and Clayster were talking about it on Twitter, but obviously I wasn't watching like MW2 competitive, so I'll kind of defer to them on that. But yeah, I didn't see a whole lot as far as competitively like what could be viable for this, at least in terms of maps. Of course, we had Hardpoint as one of the game modes this weekend, and then it was TDM and Dom to start off, and then they added Kill Confirmed when they added Rust into the game as well. I think I only played Kill Confirmed like a handful of times, and obviously playing TDM is very tedious because it's a lot of camping and there's really not a lot of objective work. But yeah, I thought it was better than I expected. So kind of similar to you. Hopefully High Rise is good, because then that's 3 maps, and then I can just completely avoid Favela and Estate at all costs. And maybe they'll add a map or two during the weekend as well, because it's kind of an early access these first 2 days, and then on the weekend until Tuesday, that'll be the official beta, I guess, the official open beta. But yeah, I thought it was all right, and it's I like, as far as the weapons go, I mean, I always like when there's an overpowered SMG and AR, like not even being sarcastic on that. Like if like I'd rather because BO4 had the ICR, which was literally just a beam, like it did not move at all in BO4. So that was fun to play with. Obviously having a OP SMG like the MP5 and MW19, that was fun. Like I liked playing with that. I wish the ump in this game was that fun to play with, but it's it's good. Like the striker's fun to play. The MCW, the ACR, like it's fun. But yeah, it's kind of if if you liked MW19, if you liked MW2 last year, you'll love this game. Like it feels pretty much the same as back then, or not back then, now. Like COD seems to just be a completely different game, and that's kind of what I came back to. Not to just keep rambling, but I was actually thinking about this, like because they're kind of marketing this as okay, if you played those MW2 games, or if you played MW2 a decade ago, then you'll get to see all of your favorite maps come back for this game. But I think it would be better for those people that haven't played COD in a decade. It probably would not make them want to buy COD if they played the beta, like in my personal opinion, because like it's just like it's better to be ignorant heading into launch day than to know kind of what you're getting into, because COD is completely different now in 2023 than it was MW2 released in 2010, 2009, something like that.
Yeah.
So that was like nearly 15 years ago. If you haven't played a COD game since then, you probably would not be enticed to buy the full launch of MW3 in 2023 if you played the beta, because it's just completely different. Like COD just doesn't feel like, I won't say COD doesn't feel like COD, because there is something about it, but like it's really different, and it's not very similar. You could honestly, if you played MW3 2023 and you played MW2 in 2009, 2010, you would think that one of them was like an off-brand kind of like copier of the other. You wouldn't probably know which one it is if it was just a blank test, but I do feel like you wouldn't be able to tell that they're actually supposed to be similar, or supposed to be a part of the same game, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it was fine. It was overall, I would give it a thumbs up for the first weekend of the beta, but it didn't make me want to I just don't think the maps are going to be good enough, in all honesty, to keep me engaged, because the weapons kind of mean very little in terms of it. Like the maps have to be good. I think that's like probably the biggest thing to keep people engaged on a long-term basis. But yeah, enough of me rambling. I don't know if you had any thoughts or comments on what I said.
No, I mean, the big thing for me that I've been talking about, I feel like, again, it's been a while since we've done a show, but I feel like it's something I've mentioned on the show, was definitely something I've talked to head Ego Chall correspondent Tremor about, is just, like you said, the game is so much different than when these maps were out 14 years ago. Um, and the movement is just so much different that I don't know what the competitive map pool is going to look like, tying this
Yeah.
all back into the upcoming CDL season. The biggest example of that is Scrapyard. Scrapyard's a very small map. It was one of the better maps in my opinion in MW2. I don't again know specifically, like referring to that, that Clayster Aches JCap exchange. I don't think they mentioned Scrapyard, but I'm not exactly sure where they would rank it when they were playing back then. But it was definitely involved in all of the competitive modes back in that time. Um, but just due to its size, like a guy like Shotzi, I feel like could get around the entire map in 15 seconds once he's got the movement figured out and stuff. And obviously that wasn't possible so many years ago. So I've been joking about it with Tremor, but I've been saying like maps like Derail and Rundown, which weren't they're very large maps in comparison to one like Scrapyard, and definitely Derail is definitely not a very popular map. I've been joking with him that those might end up being some of the better hardpoint maps, because again, like you said, hardpoint wasn't a thing when these original maps were created. So finding what maps hardpoint works on the best for the CDL and esports is going to be interesting to see how the pros go about that. And some of the bigger maps, unironically, might end up being some of the better choices. They're obviously going to have to do their testing and see once they figure out where all the hard points are located, what the rotations are like, all that, etc. But that's one thing I am definitely going to be keeping my eye on personally once the game comes out officially and all the maps are available for the pros to test on and stuff. I'm going to see what they think, and it'll be cool to see in comparison what the map set is like, obviously, so many years later. But even a map like Skid Row, which I'm pretty sure, if I remember playing GBs on it correctly, I'm pretty sure it was involved in at least some form of the rule set during the original MW2 days. One of the spawns, I think it's by the C domination flag, but where like the laundry room is, that's where one of the bombs was in the original map, and now there's doors there. And obviously doors weren't a thing in MW2, so going into a bomb site with doors is obviously very you're able to turn up your sound EQ if that's a thing still, and just sound horror listening to anybody entering the bomb site like that. You don't even have to watch it if you can just hear them breaching doors and stuff like that. So definitely going to be interesting to see how what other changes similar to that affect the competitiveness of these maps from an esports standpoint. But yeah, I thought that was one thing you mentioning the maps made me think about. And then the other thing, is that it did kind of feel like this was just a copy of MW2, the last MW2 on the OG MW2 maps. Like there were a lot of people comparing just the UI in general from MW3, the MW3 beta and last year's MW2, and so many similarities and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, people are always going to look for things they can complain about and all that stuff. But I do genuinely think that might be me being naive, but I'm hopeful that just based on the initial reaction that there's at least a tweet put out, I believe yesterday or earlier this week, about some of the stuff they're looking into already from just the first weekend of the beta. So maybe this is a year where we get a little more support on the developer side. But again, that could just be me being naive and thinking things are going to change, and we get another year of little support. But who knows? Maybe at least the general population will get some more of that support, and it might just trickle down into the esports scene. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, so Sledgehammer tweeted yesterday that the October 10th, so 2 days probably from when people will actually listen to this pod. But they said weekend 1 of the MW3 multiplayer beta has come to an end. We'll be back on Thursday with the highly anticipated return of High Rise, debut of Cutthroat, and more expected throughout the weekend ahead. Until then, we'd like to take a moment to thank you all for your feedback. Our team is hard at work on further improvements for weekend 2 and beyond. Later this week, you can expect an update on some of the top concerns we've observed, including but not limited to operator visibility, slide timing, and spawn selection. Spawns were weird. I didn't notice on every map, but like Skid Row, guys would like just spawn right in front of me. Like I watched a guy spawn and I killed him, and I just thought like he has to be so mad because he spawned in garage and I was just like literally 10 feet from him, which is not great. And but I didn't really notice it. Like it happened to me a few times on Skid Row, but I didn't really notice it a lot with the other maps. Obviously, a state is gigantic, so you shouldn't be spawning in front of anybody. Slide timing, I think there was like a delay from like when you slid to like when you could tack sprint, and I think that was the complaint for a lot of people. I didn't notice it. Like obviously, I have automatic tack sprint because I'm not gonna destroy my my thumbs. So, which my hands were hurting after playing COD this weekend. I haven't played that much COD in probably like 4 years, so my hands were like legitimately sore. And it would only be worse if I actually had to press down my left stick every single time. But I guess I think that was the main complaint about the slides was like. If you slid, then you would have like a little buffer for when you could actually tack sprint. I hate tack sprint as like just a general rule. I think it's a really stupid thing. But to your point, that completely changes the game as far as maps because like tack sprint is so much faster and that just like changes the game in terms of like how maps work. Like you can get across a map so much more quickly now than you could 10 years ago, because you would have to have marathon to even sprint that far, and that wasn't nearly as fast as tac sprint. So but yeah, that's part of the update coming for weekend 2. And then operator visibility, which was like, I thought the major issue, and I think it's always an issue with non-Treyarch games, because I think Treyarch does a very good job in general of operator or like player visibility, whereas IW and Sledgehammer suck so much on this. Like they literally make it impossible to see people sometimes, like where you're squinting at the screen of like, is that a guy? And in this case, I think part of the issue was that no like little red dot would come up over a player, like their name tag wouldn't show up when you aimed at them, which just makes it so much more difficult. So hopefully that's fixed. I really think that visibility in general needs to be better in COD, just like across the board, because it seems pretty difficult to just see people sometimes, even with my glasses on. And I just got my prescription checked not that long ago, so I don't need a new pair, and they should just fix their game. But yeah, that's the stuff that's coming for the next weekend, and I would assume there's going to be more changes between the second weekend of the beta and the actual launch, which will be a month ago, or a month from today, November 11th. That's a Friday, which is so we're just a month away from the COD release. I don't know if you had anything else about the COD beta. If you had anything that you want to talk about, the only other thing was possibly balancing the weapons. That wasn't something that I don't think they talked about, but I think people probably want to at least try out some of the other ARs and SMGs and see if they're any good. I really only picked up like the Rival 9, I think it was, which was I don't know what kind of gun it's supposed to be. Like it felt kind of similar to like a Scorpion in Black Ops 2, but like not nearly as like fast. But I'm not sure what exactly kind of gun that's supposed to be based on. But I thought it was all right. They had like a variant for that specific weapon, which was called the Beta Ripper, which had like already unlocked attachments and everything, and it was fine. Like I definitely was going to use the Striker because that was the better gun anyway. But did you have any other thoughts or opinions on the beta, or maybe what to look forward to?
Um, I would just say on the visibility thing, I thought that was like, a little rusty thing for me. Like I felt like in my first couple of games I was shooting my teammates a little bit, and I thought it
Oh
was
yeah.
definitely like a me thing. But so that was good to hear. Well, I guess it was good to hear for my sanity that it wasn't just me, but obviously it'll be good to see if that's something that the devs are actually able to address. Um, I don't know if I have much else. I do remember on the one game of Rust that I remember playing, there's like that little crate on the one side where like you can walk through it, and like I was staring right at it and somebody spawned in the crate. So that was really the only experience I remember off the top of my head of noticing like a really shitty spawn for somebody else, and obviously I just fried that kid right in a second. He probably wasn't too happy, but it is what it is. And with the sliding, I don't even really remember trying to slide cancel that much. I know Trem was trying to when he was playing, and I can't really remember him saying anything in particular about it too much. Actually, I do remember he's been playing a lot of a Cold War lately. Um, just playing Chows and that. So I do remember him complaining a little bit about how different it felt at first when he first started playing. But I guess we'll have to wait to hear from him what he thinks about that as more of a movement expert than us. Especially if they do address it this week. But obviously well, not obviously for our fans. He also will not be around this weekend like me. So we'll have to see if they do address it and he is able to get some time in. It'll be good to hear what he has to say about any potential changes there, and then we can relay that to our fans. I was trying to look up the OG MW2 rule set for maps and stuff that was around, and I wasn't able to find it, but I do remember a couple maps that obviously are not in the beta that were definitely competitively viable back then in particular modes, including Terminal, Invasion, Karachi were just a couple that came to mind when I was looking here. Those maps obviously aren't available in the beta, but if they are, remotely close to what they were previously, especially Terminal, which was a really strong map. Oh, I do have it here. The MLG variant mode settings on game battles for MW2, but this is obviously in 2023. I think this is an old link though. High Rise Invasion Karachi Scrapyard and Terminal for search. Capture the Flag was High Rise Invasion Scrapyard Terminal, and then Demolition High Rise Invasion Scrapyard Terminal. So none of those maps are. I must have been playing like Skid Row or something in Map Gen or something back in the day when you played like random modes on random maps on GB. But from what I can see, none of the maps that were officially in the OG MLG map set for the original MW2 are available in this beta until High Rise comes tomorrow. So we'll have to see. I guess High Rise will give us a good taste of potentially what could be a CDL map for the upcoming year, depending again on how it plays in the new game and any changes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I was actually looking at the maps, just like not a MOG, just kind of because I've only played probably like half of these or remember playing half of these. And I think Strike is a part. Wasn't that in COD 4 as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but it's on the MW2. I don't know if that was like a DLC map or something for MW2. And then
So.
Crash was also on this list, so it might be just like but it might be both MW and MW2 on this one. But I didn't see really any maps here that were like jumping out to me as like, oh, that looks like a really fun competitive map. Terminal, I remember playing as just like a fun pub map because it's like the most unique COD map. Like there's an actual airplane and like it's an airport terminal, so it's pretty cool looking. But I can't say that I've ever played any competitive maps on any competitive games on these maps. So that'll be fun or not. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know if we have anything else on this. I'm trying to think if anything is. I was just trying to look through some of these maps. Yeah, I don't think I think the maps are just going to be like the biggest part to like to competitive. If there aren't like 10 maps or not 10 maps total, but like I just mean like maybe like 4 or 5 hard points, and like if we just have like a really small map pool, it's just gonna suck. I like the competitive games are always fun to watch just because like it's actually competitive. It's like fun to watch the best players compete, but like it would be really annoying if it's like Karachi, Karachi, Karachi. Like I'm gonna lose my mind because we go through that every single year. But yeah, I think from like a pub standpoint, it'll be cool for the nostalgia hit for a lot of people that played the original MW2 and got to play some of these maps. But I think from a competitive standpoint, it is going to be probably a little bit slim pickings because even the pros that played these maps, close to 15 years ago, like you said, the game's kind of changed in that regard. So they're not going to be too happy playing on these maps where, it would have been perfectly fine back in 2010, but now you got Shotzi and he's already up in your grill like 10 seconds into the map, and it's not going to be fun anymore.
And that's what the CDL Twitter account put out an image yesterday. The CDL Pro Ages on release of MW2. And they didn't really have to do Clay like this, but it shows Joe Deceives, Clay, and Snoopy. And Clay was 17 years old in the release of the original MW2, and Joe Deceives and Snoopy were 5. So while Clay was fighting for those GB trophies and creds back in the day on some of these maps, uh, Joe Deceives and Snoopy could barely speak in sentences or write their name. So it will be interesting to see how some of these younger pros um, play on some of these older maps, depending on what is in the rotation. And it could just be a completely, I mean, obviously it is a different game, but it could just look completely different. Like I said, Scrapyard is the one to me. I would be very surprised if Scrapyard was actually playable in a competitive sense this year, just because I feel like it would just be so fast. Like it would literally be, it might be like, if there was a 6-0 S&D on Scrapyard, it could just be 6 15-second rounds, because I'm pretty sure 15 seconds is the lowest possible time for rounds. And if everyone was just sprinting down the lanes and getting those kills instantly, like it could be one of the fastest maps in COD history. So that's the one that jumps out to me right away. But yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on that enough at this point now. We're just gonna have to wait and see how all this plays out, and we'll be here for you guys along that ride, ready to talk about it all.
Yep. Yeah, so if you are interested, you could play the beta this weekend on whatever platform. PS5, PlayStation, or PS5, Xbox, or PC. So that's cool. I probably don't want to play against the PC kids because I mean it just opens up the floodgates for any potential hackers, and some of the people on mouse and keyboard are a little crazy anyway. But I hope everyone has fun. Hopefully, I don't have to play any more Favela in a state. Congratulations to Bink's sister, by the way, for getting married. So that's cool. Congrats to Bink for hopefully getting another wedding picture that we can use to put in the group chat, or hopefully if you make it do an embarrassing picture, we can use it as a meme in the Slack chat. Yeah, I think that about does it. It's a pretty succinct. I think we're right about an hour for the show. Hopefully we'll be back next week or 2 weeks, depending on what happens. But obviously depends. If the beta is very uneventful, obviously Bink will be playing a lot. But even if he does end up playing quite a bit and it's just kind of like same old, we probably won't be doing a show next week. But if it's, I don't know what they could do to really make it super eventful, considering you've played all of these maps before. And
They surprise drop the map. Maybe if they, added a new gun or something like that. That is one interesting thing we could talk about real quick.
yeah,
I think there was a leak that there's like some AW Advanced Warfare maps,
oh
maybe
yeah,
the BAL and the ASM1 potentially coming in season during MW3 this year. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but from my point of view, I mean, most of the DLC weapons that are added throughout COD seasons are usually overtuned and broken, and even in the event they aren't, they are usually almost 100% of the time GA'd competitively. So although some people, shout out Merchant Bros, some of them might actually be excited to use these. Don't know if it'll have an actual impact on the CDL if those guns were to actually be added mid-season.
I never played AW, so but I did watch a lot of AW because I was still following the competitive scene and whatnot back then. But I always liked the look and sound of the ASM1 and BAL. Obviously, like those were the only two competitive guns that I even remember in AW. I don't know if there were literally any other guns.
Sniper.
Yeah, yeah, I do remember that one, but yeah, I thought they always looked cool. They sounded good. Like I don't know, like it's completely different now because you don't have guys literally flying in the air. So that kind of changes things in terms of like how viable they will be and how much you have to like change them based on that, or if you need to change them based on kind of the movement now. But it's always cool to I think we're getting closer, hopefully, to all of these COD worlds kind of colliding and congregating into one game. Like that's the ideal world where you could have like the ASM-1 and you could have the BAL. You could have the ICR from Black Ops 4. You could have the ACR from whatever game. You could have the SCAR. You could have the M4 or the MAA-1 from Black Ops 2. The MSMC, the MP9 from literally whatever game. You could have all these guns in one game. Hopefully, likely not, but hopefully balanced to a degree where there are multiple viable weapons, so you could actually like play with different guns depending on the like the play style or the map that you want. And then we could have all of these maps that are very well known and finely tuned. You have all these weapons that are well known and finely tuned, and you could have literally COD Mobile, but on console and PC. That's the ideal world that I would like to live in. And hopefully that's kind of what we're kind of getting to, but you know, that's just hopeful stuff.
Yeah, and I think we might actually be getting somewhat close to that, just in the sense of, I don't know if you noticed it since you haven't been playing, but the like actual like home for Call of Duty is just
Yeah.
like now Call of Duty now. It's not like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is just Call of Duty, and that's where like the home of Call of Duty is all in there. I think it's called the HQ on PC. But for me on PlayStation, it was just called
Yeah.
Call of
I
Duty.
noticed that.
And you can like in that menu, I could play MW2 since I have it downloaded, or I could play the beta. You can play Warzone from that same menu. It's the same UI system from MW2, but that is potentially a step where now it's just going to be called Call of Duty, and the new game is just available in that like hub or central HQ as they're calling it. And I think I was watching a Tactical Rab video the other day where he mentioned, I don't think it's like been confirmed or anything like that, but it might have been potentially reported on that um, we could eventually, with the Activision and Microsoft merger, uh, conceivably get to a point where like Call of Duty is on the Xbox Game Pass, and then all of the old Call of Duties are on Game Pass. So that wouldn't necessarily be like exactly what you're talking about, like a Call of Duty Mobile with all the stuff from the
Yeah.
games in one, but it would have, I would be able to, if I had Game Pass, in theory, I'd be able to play MW2 2009 like it was 14 years ago, which that would be cool too.
Yeah.
But it just seems with these changes, and it's conceivable that we could go down any one of those possible routes that we were just mentioning.
Yeah, I think the Game Pass thing is like 100% going to happen just whenever the PlayStation exclusive deal goes away for COD and Activision, because I don't think they're going to cancel that. So like whenever that expires, I think that's when we'll see COD and on Game Pass and kind of like the key feature of Game Pass. The only like issue with those older games is like they can be really infested with hackers, and just like obviously the net code is really bad on some of those games. Like that's part of the nostalgia that people usually forget about, is just how bad like the ping can be for something like even Black Ops 2. Like obviously I love Black Ops 2, but I remember like lagging a lot in that game, and like the server disconnects and stuff. So that's really the only thing. But I think the idea of just being able to play Call of Duty and it being just like either one game that has like the best of all of the worlds, or just kind of being able to play any of these games, kind of like a backward compatibility system, that's like the ideal thing. um, but I, like the idea that we get like a COD mobile for like the actual console or PC, I just think like that's not going to happen because they just make so much money on these yearly
Yeah.
releases, and that's more of like an optimistic, like almost hopeless optimistic about it. But yeah, I think it's a cool thing to think about. I hope that we do get these older weapons that are viable or at least fun to play with, because that's always cool. Because I think you know it's nice to be able to use like the ump and the ACR, but it's also nice to be able to just like have like a fun gun that isn't necessarily like the best competitive gun out there, like just something fun to use. But we'll kind of see if that is the case, if they balance or anything this coming week or before the launch. Anything you wanted to talk about before we headed out?
Oh, I think we hit everything and more.
Yeah.
If you guys, obviously in the comments of YouTube, if you're watching on there, if you guys have any thoughts on the MW3 beta, let us know what you think. And I guess potentially if you're listening to this after the second weekend has already happened, if you want to let us know any of your thoughts on the potential changes that go through between weekends 1 and 2. That could give us some comments to read on the following episode and some potential topics to talk about as well. So let us know if you have anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, but that about does it for the show. Make sure to subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Like Bink said, we are on YouTube, and thank you guys for the support that you guys have been showing us for a long time there. And thank you for anybody who's been subscribing on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Google Podcast. It's very much appreciated. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube, and I think people tap the bell icon. I think that's what the YouTubers say nowadays. That I think that's to get notified when we upload our videos. Follow us on Twitter. He is at jbink with 2Ks. I'm at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. The next show is TBD, as we mentioned. Could be next week. It could be 2 weeks. Obviously, we don't like going a whole month without the show, but that was kind of like both being off from work. Obviously, Bink has been busy with his sister's wedding and stuff, and there just hasn't been a ton of like really pressing news that we need to talk about. But maybe the beta, and obviously we are now a month away from the MW3 launch. That could give us something more to talk about on a consistent basis. Hopefully, the CDL will be, I don't know, confirming something any week, any month they want to do that. That would be nice, because we theoretically should be about 2 months away from the start of the season. But you never know. But hopefully we get some news on that and we can have stuff to regularly talk about. But either way, we'll be back in either a week or two to discuss the beta and whatever else has popped up in the COD world in that time. Yeah, that's it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I got nothing else to add. So thank you guys as always for the support. We'll see you whenever we see you again. And as always, remember, send a chow.